First and foremost, Mark, I just have to say thank you for honoring so many of these students, because that's truly how I got my start in the conservative movement. I was a Turning Point USA chapter president, just like those students were, with a rickety folding table and handing people a socialism sucks button on my college campus every day, which is why I fell in love with this world and with this movement we're dedicating so much of our lives to revive the American dream and to give Western civilization a blueprint we can be proud to call home again in the future. It's not flashy and it doesn't necessarily get you a whole lot of extra clicks, but those stories of students really are the heart and soul of the conservative movement, and they truly are the warriors putting their lives on the front lines every single day of the culture war, just like Charlie did. So it was an honor to be able to listen to some of their stories this morning. As you mentioned, we launched my show on Monday 3 weeks ago, and Charlie was killed on Wednesday of that week, which was truly a baptism by fire of commentary in the middle of what can only be described as the most tragic experience of my adult life. And I was incredibly blessed, and still am thanking God daily that I was one of the last people to share the stage with Charlie at one of his last speaking engagements on this earth a week before he died in California at a beautiful church community on behalf of the pro-life community, and was able to spend about 2 hours behind the scenes backstage with Charlie before our speeches, which we never have the luxury of doing. And all he wanted to talk about was God and his deep, deep faith, his mission and vocation from the Holy Spirit to tell people the truth, which always leads them back to God. And he seemed so centered on that mission, far above getting anyone elected to a presidency position, pushing any sort of political agenda, or getting people registered to vote. His real calling at the end of the day, and I think really transcended his entire messaging in the later half of his life, was God and bringing people to the Holy Spirit, to Jesus Christ, and to understanding our mission as Christians in the culture war to always put that at the forefront of what we do. So I was incredibly moved today hearing the stories of these students recentering their mission on that as well. And ultimately, this turning point that we're seeing in the country in the last 3 weeks is so much bigger than fighting for limited government and free speech and conservative political principles. It's a turning point back, repenting away from the brokenness and sin our society has seen over the last 10 years and embracing the fullness of God's love for society, which I know Charlie would be more proud of than anything else he left behind.
Yeah. Should the mission of the organization shift more in that direction, more of a faith organization, or should they keep the politics agenda that was a big part of what Charlie spent his time on as well?
You know, I think it already has shifted quite substantially. A few years ago, Turning Point USA launched a different division of the company called TPUSA Faith, where they were having a lot of these similar conversations with pastors and priests and religious podcasters and people more involved in the religious side of things. But what made Charlie so unique, and I think what his vocation was so special, given from the Lord for, was that he understood the reality that Christians are not of this world. We know that our home ultimately is in heaven, but that doesn't negate our responsibility to act in this world. In fact, at that last speaking engagement that we shared the stage on, one of the last things Charlie said before we opened it up for Q&A was that he's frustrated often that the church used eschatology or end time prophecy and theology to essentially use it as an excuse for us not to act in the world, to say, well, Jesus is coming back and the world's so crazy that I don't need to worry about that. I can let God take care of it. We are called to be stewards of the society that we live in and to influence our communities and our countries toward good, to make sure that we are always pursuing what is good and true and beautiful. And I think back to those last few words that he said on stage, I have no idea if he had some sort of premonition about anything or just knew that he was on operating urgent time, certainly. He said eschatology is not an excuse for the church not to act in the world. I know. One of you during the Q&A is going to come approach me and say, Charlie, I've got it all figured out. Jesus is coming back next Thursday. We'll all be in heaven next Thursday, and we don't have to worry about this. Well, coincidentally, he died the following Wednesday. And I get chills thinking about that, even still, a couple of weeks out of this experience. But he knew more than anyone I've ever met that we have to make sure it is on earth as it is in heaven. We can't just keep our eyes fixed on heaven. So I think having one foot on the religious side and one foot on the more political, secular side is exactly where Turning Point is and needs to be moving forward.
Yeah. The minute he was assassinated, the journalistic mind of mine said, I know what's going to happen. I'm going to hear from a lot of Democrats involved in public life, read the news, who are going to say, never heard of him. or didn't realize he was such a big deal. And I said, it's going to be incumbent upon people who did understand what a big deal he was to explain patiently why he mattered so much. What does it say about the country that someone who was objectively so important to our politics, our culture, to young people around the country, like we just heard from, was unknown, basically, to so many smart people in Blue America? What does that say about the country?
That's a fascinating observation, and one I haven't really reflected on much up to this point, but I think reflects this idea of what we often talk about in the culture war, that we are living in two different Americas. The media that we're consuming, the conversations we're having around the family dinner table, who we surround ourselves with in our friend group, the entertainment that we watch with our family on Saturday night. You either are living in the fight of the conservative movement to be pushing towards what is good and true and beautiful, or this upside down woke reality that the left has really hijacked every cultural institution in America to push their agenda through. The education system, Hollywood, the government, even the church in many ways has reflected that over the past few years. That's a problem, truly, especially in moments of crisis like we've seen in the wake of Charlie's violent assassination, because I often think about what our parents would tell our generation about the day after 9/11, when there was such a common enemy that it didn't matter what you looked like, who you voted for, what language you grew up speaking at home, what your most inmost values really were in your family unit. You were able to link arms and say, we are a United States of America, and this is who we are. We are going to keep standing up, keep existing, and it's imperative that we keep fighting for freedom for those who come after us. That's not what we've seen in the wake of Charlie's death. And in many ways, I think it feels like what our parents described the morning after 9/11, that it was a whole different world. It is a totally different reality. And I think people are waking up to the fact that there are so many people who are actively celebrating Charlie's assassination. They're calling for more violence against political commentators. We broke a story this morning of an EPA staffer who lost their job this week, saying that he wanted every right-wing commentator essentially to face the exact same fate as Charlie Kirk. There are streamers on Twitch playing video games, like Destiny is his screen name, a young man named Steven, saying all right-wingers should be afraid of being killed when they go to political events. And this man is still monetized on the internet, still makes a living as a content creator. That feels new, but at the same time, I think it's a wake-up call for so many people on the left to realize just how far the Democrat Party and the left wing of American politics has gone. They want nothing associated with this bloodthirsty vengeance and anger to the point of assassination for people who think differently from them. And I hope it's a turning point for the country to be able to experience that United States of America feeling again.
You're a person of faith and a big believer, a turning point, and the leadership there is extraordinary. One of the many things Charlie was underrated at, he kind of downplayed his managerial abilities, claimed he didn't have them, but he built an extraordinary organization from scratch, over $100 million budget, all the different divisions. How worried are you that he is irreplaceable, that for all the efforts that people are making to help, and from the president to Erica to others, that he's singular and the organization can't thrive as it did in his life?
Charlie was really my closest mentor in the political world over the past few years. As you know, Mark, I never set out to work in politics or in media. I was pre-med in college. I was a nerdy biomedical sciences student and ultimately aimed at being a trauma surgeon, just trying to use my love of science to help people, and got involved in the conservative movement somewhat by accident. I won't spare your viewers the very long story about this, but attended a TPUSA conference and completely fell in love with the mission of the organization and the mission that Charlie Kirk dedicated his life to. Backwards by accident, fell into the world of commentary after Charlie encouraged me, don't go work in a fluorescently lit hospital anymore. You should pursue this gift that God has given you, and we're going to help you do that. Charlie was so skilled, not just at building an empire of his organization or building an army of followers to follow his mission, but by building other people. And today there are members of Congress, there are vice presidents of the United States, and many other commentators like myself who owe everything in our careers to Charlie Kirk and his ability to spot talent and help foster and disciple that talent through very long periods of friendship and mentorship over the years. So in many ways, you're right, Charlie Kirk can never be replaced. He had enormous shoes to fill, quite literally, because he was such a tall man. He really did have giant shoes, but there will never be another voice, mind, and heart like Charlie Kirk, and the world is sorely hurting and heartbroken over the loss of that. But I am so encouraged to see people link arms from the White House to other media organizations to the existing Turning Point employees, and now an entire generation that has been inspired by his message to no longer lack the courage to speak up and to devote everything they can in their careers, their spheres of influence, their families, their college campuses, and so much more to keep passing that torch forward. I'm not worried at all for the future of the organization, and I certainly am more inspired about the conservative movement at large, even bigger than TPUSA, now more than ever before in the last decade working for the movement.
What do you say to people who are not sharing your optimism about the organization, but who are angry that he was taken, who are angry about the reaction from some people, celebrating his assassination, and maybe don't feel as hopeful as you and those young people do? What do you say to those folks?
Anger is not necessarily a bad emotion to be feeling at this moment in time, and it's obviously something that those of us who know Charlie so well have all been struggling with over the past 3 weeks. Grief comes in waves, and I think the anger wave hits us every couple of days at the very least, if not every few hours. And it's something I've really been struggling with as well, but Father Mike Schmitz, the host of the Bible in a Year podcast and one of my favorite creators on the internet, appeared on Megyn Kelly's podcast the day or 2 days after Charlie was killed, and said that if you're not feeling angry about this, then you're not really a human being. You have righteous anger for a reason, because our emotions mean we were made in the image of God. We're supposed to feel a thread of common humanity between all of us. And when you watch a father of 2 children and a husband to a beautiful wife have his life so publicly and violently taken from him for the only crime of wanting to have honest conversations with people he disagreed with, that should make you angry. But we are not ever supposed to stay in anger. And that's what I think people need to remember about Charlie's mission in life, is that more than anything else, Charlie wanted to follow the teachings of Christ. He wanted to share the love of Christ with the world. And I know Erica has been the perfect example of that in the wake of his death, even using her time on stage at the memorial 11 days after he was killed to publicly forgive the man who violently took her husband's life. It's hard. It's a hard thing to do. And you saw her emotion as she walked through that horrific experience on stage and being able to share that vulnerability with people. I think you're seeing all of our anger reacting to so many of these people calling for more violent crime and violent assassinations of other people on the right. But never let your anger become unrighteous or overshadow your joyful mission to carry this torch forward, because ultimately we only get one life, and it's not guaranteed to stay here. We have to always keep our eyes fixed on what's coming next and try to make Earth a little bit more like heaven, not the other way around.
Isabel, you're one of literally about 1,000 people I know who knew Charlie far better than I did. And I was such a student of his mind as a journalist, and eager to understand how he did what he did, because there's really never been anyone like him. There's other people who've been involved in media and politics and organization and building faith and inspiring young people. But I can't think of an example, not just currently, but ever, in part because of his sophisticated use of all the technology that never existed before. What allowed him to do all that? But besides a work ethic, what allowed him, what was it about his mind, his attitude, that allowed him to do so many things at a very high level?
When I met Charlie, his mission for Turning Point USA was so much simpler than what it was at the end of his life. I met Charlie in 2017, so he was in his early 20s and wore very ill-fitting baggy suits and white New Balance dad sneakers, and everyone gave him such a hard time for it. But even back then, he had this ethic of work and this ethic of service to other people that I have never seen before. We joked over the years that he probably only slept for about 30 minutes a night, and sometimes even then he would take a nap at 2 or 3 p.m. in the afternoon instead of sleeping at night, so that he could constantly be dedicating himself to his mission. But what I really noticed shift over the years at TPUSA, from first being involved as a student to later as a contributor and media personality for the organization, and now as an alumnus working in the larger conservative movement, was that Charlie's mission became bigger than limited government, free speech, and free markets, which was what the foundation of Turning Point USA was. At some point, he realized that the source of truth, which was what our society is so desperately missing, has to come from one source only, and that is God. We believe truth has a name with a capital T, and that name is Jesus Christ. And when he started fully devoting the mission of his organization, his commentary as his radio show and television show, and what he was doing on campus to God, you saw a softness about him that just created this mass adaptability to speaking to an entire generation, young men, young women, young conservatives, young liberals. Immediately, people's guard went down the moment they started conversing with him, even in those hot button debate moments on college campuses that turned into the viral clips on Twitter and beyond, because people realized this was a young man who woke up every day and said, "Here I am, Lord, send me. Use me as a megaphone for whatever you want to tell the world." And I think there's only a supernatural explanation for the following that Charlie has grown over the last few years. But look how much it's grown even after his death. He was fully prepared for losing his life for his country and for the mission of bringing people to his Lord and Savior, to Jesus Christ. And his Instagram following alone, I think, speaks to that in the last few weeks. Charlie had about 3 million followers on Instagram when he died. It's well over 13 million followers now in just 3 weeks. So I have a feeling that his message and his voice is not going anywhere, even though as a Christian, they just changed his address to heaven instead of here on earth.
Hey, everybody, if you're 64 years old or older, this is an important announcement. The Department of Justice recently sued 3 major Medicare brokers for claiming they were unbiased while allegedly pushing people into plans that got them the biggest kickbacks. It's true, so many insurance agents, they just can't be trusted, but you can't necessarily rely on government resources either. So what to do? Well, I want you to know about Chapter. Chapter was started by people who went through this exact thing personally after their own parents were pushed into the wrong Medicare plan by an agent who was more focused on commissions than on good care. Chapter's mission is very simple: give every American the honest, straightforward Medicare advice they deserve. And here's what's different about them. They're the only Medicare advisor that compares every plan nationwide, not just a handful. That saves their clients, get this, an average of $1,100 every year. There's no reason not to call. It's quick, it's easy, and they can review your options in under 20 minutes. If you're already in the right plan, they'll let you know that. But if they see a better plan, they'll help you make the switch. This could be the most important call you make this year. Dial right now, pound 250, and say Chapter Medicare to get that peace of mind. Again, that's pound 250 and say Chapter Medicare.